From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm your host, Kennedy Vincent. Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. We start today's dialogue talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict in Gaza and how we are seeing Black solidarity on both sides globally. Today, we will be speaking with students and professors and an African-American rabbi. We spoke with our guests in early May when university student encampments were taking place on the Quad.
Hundreds of pro-Palestine protesters flooded Green Street on U of I's campus today, asking administrators for change.
Your next story is that U of I students resumed protesting earlier this morning at the alma mater statue in Urbana.
The pro-Palestine encampment on U of I's Quad is entering its second week. Now faculty members are officially joining the protest. The U of I Faculty for Justice...
The Dialogue team sat down with Professor Eric McDuffie in early May, and he shared his experiences as an associate professor of African American Studies and as a member of Faculty for Justice in Palestine. Professor Eric McDuffie, thank you so much for joining us on Dialogue today.
It's my pleasure.
What have you been seeing across the U.S. with encampments on college campuses? How have you been keeping up with everything?
Oh my goodness, well, so much has been going on, right? Here on campus and across the country and increasingly across the world. But here, I've had the privilege of spending time at the encampment and getting to know some of the students and faculty down there who are doing some fantastic work.
Let's talk a little bit more about what's happening on campus and what we've been seeing within the past week, maybe 2 weeks or so. What are we seeing at the U of I?
Well, what we're seeing is countless students and faculty, as well as folks across the community, supporting students, some of whom have established an encampment on the Quad to call for the U of I's divestment from Israel, and again, to show solidarity for the people of Gaza. A whole lot of dialogue and conversation, is happening about how can we make the university divest? How can we best support the people of Gaza? Thinking in real terms and time about the possibilities of the police coming in. And also what's really exciting, and I don't know if folks know this, but there are parents, right? Parents of students who have come down from Chicago or elsewhere to actually spend the night with their students, their children, to make sure they're cool, they're safe. And again, the outgrowth or just the amount of support that folks are seeing, I think, is very exciting.
And when we talk about some of these terms like a genocide, why do you think it's a genocide? And then also, can you define genocide for our audience?
Sure. Well, first, I do believe what we are witnessing right now is a form of genocide. And certainly that didn't just start on October 7th. It started before. But the systematic extermination or attempt to eradicate a people, culture, their lives, their livelihoods, United Nations and its various human rights declarations about genocide, I think, make it quite clear. And I think it's significant that the International Court of Justice just a month or so ago came out due, of course, to the actions of South Africa and trying to petition. And the ICJ ruled that South Africa had the grounds for charging Israel with genocide against the Palestinian people.
In May of 2024, Israel responded to the UN International Court of Justice's request for them to, quote, immediately withdraw and cease its military operations in Rafah Governorate, a request that came out of the decision made by the ICJ in the South African case against Israel. That was what Professor Eric McDuffie is referring to. In response, Israel claimed the case was an, quote, obscene exploitation, end quote, of the UN Genocide Convention and refuted South Africa's accusations. We reached out to the U of I spokesperson, Robin Kaler, and in response, she stated, quote, we are focused on the substantive and actionable things we can do together here, and now to make our campus community stronger, and the educational experience for our students the best it can be, end quote. We asked Professor Eric McDuffie, court ruling aside, why he, as a Black man and an individual, chooses to stand for Palestine.
I care deeply about freedom and justice and human rights. I am African American. I come from a family going back to the 19th century who was very much involved in social justice protests, abolitionists, Underground Railroad conductors, trade unionists, communists. Both my mom and dad were active in the civil rights movement at the local level. I kind of say it's in my blood, right, to be engaged or to care about these issues. But the fact you've got, 36,000 plus people at least killed, and that the U.S. Is the main benefactor of Israel and is arming and supporting Israel. And also at the very same time, I want to be clear, and again, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for FJP. I'm also very troubled by the fact that 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th. But, the violence is not equal, right? And tying it back to the U of I, they need to divest. I'm also old enough to recall the anti-apartheid movement when it reached its crest in the 80s. And people today forget that 30 years ago, a whole lot of folks saw Mandela as, a crazy terrorist. The U.S. government labeled him and the African National Congress as terrorists. Anti-apartheid protest was not popular. Many of the same kinds of arguments that we hear from administrators on this campus and beyond, the same kind of language that we heard 30 years ago, that, we can't do this, it's too difficult, it's too problematic, we can't really affect change, it's not our business to be involved in all this. Now, again, I don't want to suggest that the situation between Israel and South Africa, apartheid, are identical. They were not. But certainly the current pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine movement is drawing very heavily from the anti-apartheid movement.
And I want to dive into another part of the conversation, kind of breaking down this terminology for listeners. First, I'm going to ask you, can you explain the difference between Zionism and anti-Semitism?
As we know, there's been ongoing efforts and growing efforts to conflate the two, or rather to say being Jewish and Zionism are synonymous. And among Black folk, there are plenty of African-descended people who embrace various forms of Judaism, even if they don't call themselves Jews per se. And I think it's important to understand that Zionism is an ideology that emerged out of the 19th century in response to some Jewish people's yearning for homeland and for freedom. And certainly the anti-Semitism and violence that Jewish folks experienced in Europe was appalling. Again, I think it's important to understand how Zionism was and is a kind of nationalism that emerged at a particular time in history, very much like Black nationalism. They have a lot in common, actually, and it's not surprising that, so for example, Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican who led the largest Black movement in history, his movement was often called Black Zionism because Garvey looked to Jewish Zionists, this idea that a strong Jewish homeland could protect Jewish people globally. That's the same idea that Garvey had about Africa. Strong Africa could protect Black people everywhere. But I think it's important also to understand that there have always been Jewish folks who opposed Zionism, who saw Zionism as a kind of ethno-nationalist, racist ideology, a settler colonial ideology, one that called for, or in practice, the displacement of Palestinian people. So again, right now there's a real movement to conflate anti-Semitism and Zionism. I would argue no, that one can be Jewish and not be a Zionist.
Is there a history of solidarity? What's your opinion on that?
I think it's important anytime we're talking about African Americans and Palestinians or African Americans and Islam. I think it's really important, and this is what I stress in the classroom, that you can't talk about Islam without talking about Africa and African descended people, and you can't talk about Africa and African descended people without talking about Islam. And I want to stress this kind of long, complex, dynamic, beautiful relation, bonds of solidarity between African Americans and Palestinians. And certainly I think in terms of my own work, I'm very much interested in Malcolm X. And just more about Brother Malcolm, this is something that people often don't know. He actually visited Gaza. He visited Gaza from September 5th through the 6th, 1964. During that time, he spent time in Khan Yunis, a refugee camp established in 1949, a year after the Nakba, the forced removal of Palestinian people from what is now Israel, more than 750,000 people. So Brother Malcolm spent time in Gaza. He also met with a renowned poet, Palestinian poet Harun Hashim Rashid, who recounted his narrow escape from the 1956 Israeli a massacre at Khan Yunis. And again, for your listeners, Khan Yunis may light a bell here because, of course, just a few months ago, Israel basically destroyed Khan Yunis. So again, what Brother Malcolm was doing was, again, being critical of Israel as a state formation, or rather as a kind of ethno-national state formation.
Why do you think African Americans stand in solidarity, whether it is with Palestine or with Israel? We just see this theme in history of Black African Americans standing in solidarity, and obviously we have our own history with that, but I just kind of want to pick your brain on that.
It is important to note that there's no uniform position among African Americans on Palestine, on the Middle East, on Israel, right? There's, as we said already, a long history of Black folk, African Americans, supporting Palestinians. Why? Again, drawing from that rich history, that rich Afro-American prophetic tradition, that one that emphasizes that God stands on the side of the oppressed, that, again, freedom and justice transcend all people, or rather that Black folk, African Americans, need to stand on the side of justice in light of our own experiences with enslavement, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, segregation, and ongoing forms of oppression, be it mass incarceration, state violence, in various ways.
Do you think the long history of African Americans standing in solidarity with Jews is now affected by maybe some African Americans standing in solidarity with Palestine?
That's a great question. So often you'll hear people say, back in the glory days of the civil rights movement when Blacks and Jews were, walking or marching arm in arm, and then now, or more recently, there's been all this Black anti-Semitism. I think it's important to understand that those relations between Black and Jewish folks have always been fraught, have always been complicated. There was no kind of heyday or good old days where, all Black and Jewish folks got along. Part of that, of course, was economic, the way in which sometimes our Jewish-owned stores in Black neighborhoods and those kinds of competitions, those kinds of encounters, racist encounters between Blacks and Jews. I would also say, and of course, I'm not the only one, but there are many scholars and folks have pointed out that what has happened among some Jewish folks is that how they have embraced whiteness, right? And the way to succeed in this country is to become white. And at the same time, I'm not going to dismiss that there is some Black anti-Semitism out here, but certainly not to the extent that critics charge. But there was no, glory heyday of Black Jewish solidarities. And I think what's important for your listeners, and this is a dialogue, right, that there's no such thing as natural allies, right? Folks say, we're both oppressed or this and all that. No, it's about shared commitments to justice and freedom now and into the future. Not, what happened? Our folks were oppressed centuries ago or through the Holocaust, what have you. And dialoguing is tough, is difficult. It's an ongoing conversation. It's an unending conversation. As the Black feminist scholar Angela Davis says, freedom is a constant struggle, right? That we are always. I mean, of course, I hope one day that we don't have to live with, racism and imperialism and capitalism and homophobia and transphobia and the climate change that is confronting us. But again, in my view, there's not going to be like a day where everything changes. It's going to, again, involve dialogue, tough conversations, things that people don't want to hear. So, tying things back to the U of I and the encampments, the administration right now, is very much pushing back against demands for the U of I to divest, for the demands for the U of I to be transparent in its investments, and not only in terms of Israel, but globally, right? And again, many of the things they're saying or their counters are the exact same things folks were saying in the 80s about anti-apartheid.
Thank you so much, Professor McDuffie, for joining us on Dialogue.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
That was Professor Eric McDuffie, Associate Professor of African American Studies at the University of Illinois and a member of Faculty for Justice in Palestine. Coming up, we're speaking to two students, Sarah Hijab and Norman Hernandez, from the UI-UC encampments. We will also hear more about the ICJ court case regarding South Africa suing Israel from U of I law professor Francis Boyle, followed by an interview with Rabbi Capers Fanay, a Black Jewish rabbi in Chicago.
As a Jew and as a Black Jew in America, I have compassion for the suffering that I see in Gaza.
As we continue our conversation, you can leave us a voicemail at 217-244-1989 or email us at illinois-soul@illinois.edu. We're looking for folks to tell us something good about their day or week. So give us a call and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Illinois Soul. Stay with us on Dialogue after this short break. From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. Earlier in May, students on university campuses worldwide showed their support and solidarity for Palestine by partaking in encampments, which means they're occupying spaces in tents as an act of protest. At the U of I, students have been calling for the university to divest, meaning withdraw their support from Israeli companies and state entities, especially financially. They're also advocating for a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. A quick timeline of events. On April 26th, students protested at the alma mater before the encampment settled on the quad. It was here that the University of Illinois police force was called. By the end of the evening, 2 people were arrested, both of which were non-students. Following this, the student encampment on the quad went up on April 28th and lasted for about 2 weeks. As of May 10th, the encampment was taken down, and Students for Justice in Palestine released a statement saying, quote, "We have chosen to temporarily take down the encampment on our own terms," end quote. The Dialogue team visited the encampment on the sunny, calm morning of May 1st. Some students were just waking up, and others were rushing to catch their first class. The slight breeze was rustling tents as Sarah Hijab and Norman Hernandez, 2 undergrads, walked over to me to tell me about why they were there.
Our encampment is a political protest that we have set up here to, first of all, hold the university accountable for their role in the ongoing genocide, but also to demand divestment and disclosure around their investments and, pushing for an end to the occupation. Obviously, our university plays a huge role in funding companies like Boeing and Raytheon that contribute to the military occupation carried out by the state of Israel. So we think that it not only is it important, it's a necessary thing to come out here and demand that the university, invest in its people and invest in its community rather than war.
Norman Hernandez is a student organizer with Black Students for Revolution, known as BSFR. I asked Norman, what are the numbers looking like at the encampment earlier this May?
I haven't been keeping up with actual number counts, but I've been here for the majority of the day, each day. Me and one of my other BSFR co-leads are very involved in the programming of the encampment. We've been having teach-ins from a lot of notable faculty. We've been having, movie screenings, like political films, and then we're really just trying to, use the space to raise the consciousness of our fellow students. We actually have a lot of notable speakers coming up today. I don't know if you're all familiar with Gus Woods, but he will be coming to speak and talk a little bit about labor solidarity. Really, try and build a unified movement out of this. So BSFR, I would say, has been pretty central to the organization of the encampment, and I think because of that, Black students have gravitated a little bit more towards activities such as this, which I enjoy seeing.
Sarah Hijab is an undergrad and organizer in Students for Justice in Palestine, known as SJP. I asked Sarah, what was the end goal of SJP's request from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign?
Of course, our end goal is full and complete divestment from the occupational state of Israel and everything attached to it, like whether it's on a smaller level or a larger level.
Can you also talk about the Divest campaign?
I want to say it's an international movement which basically calls for boycotting Israel, divesting from it, and placing sanctions on the country. And the BDS campaign, it started here with previous SJP alumni, and my comrades and I are trying to fill in their shoes with that. The BDS here, there was a resolution passed through the student government, and it passed right away. It was very successful, but this institution is so heavily Zionist that the university created new policies just to block the divestment.
When we reached out to the university for comment, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign spokesperson Robin Kaler stated, quote, "We are focused on the substantive and actionable things we can do together here, and now to make our campus community stronger and the educational experience for our students the best it can be," end quote. On April 26th, during the initial protest at the alma mater, students were faced by the university police. They responded by kettling the officers. Kettling is actually a police tactic often used to control crowds, namely protesters, by surrounding them in a way that doesn't allow them to leave. I asked Norman if he could tell us what it was like when the students were kettling the police.
So I was actually kind of in the human chain. I was near where that incident occurred. Obviously, at that point, our concern was for all of us as students and, as unprotected individuals against the militarized police. So I know that has kind of generated some controversy or whatever, but honestly, for me, it's a testament to, the willpower of us as students. It wasn't an easy thing to stand there without any defense and committing yourself to something that's pretty dangerous and risky for the sake of not only this movement, but the protection of each other.
Sarah, tell us about the Palestinian community in the CU.
The Palestinian community here is really great. It's really tight-knit. Not only is with the Palestinian, but with the other Arabs and the other Muslims here. Very uplifting and supporting community. I mean, that was one of the reasons why my parents made the initial move to Champaign in the first place. I just think about how I'm really grateful to have the Palestinian community here, because I never felt ashamed of my identity or being Arab, and I was always really proud of being Palestinian, and I would always go to protest here, which was SJP organized protest when I was a kid. So it was just really awesome to get to grow up with that, and I'm really grateful.
How do you feel about growing up, going to the protests as a kid, and now for all of this to just be continuing, and now you're playing a role as a young adult?
It was really a surreal moment. When I first started up SGP, the alumni sent me a picture of me on the website or something. I was like, oh my god, that's kind of scary. But then also that picture was taken from a protest when in 2014 when Gaza was under attack. And then now that I'm here organizing because Gaza is under attack again, but at a way harsher level, it's really disheartening. It's gut-wrenching, but it just shows that the fight needs to keep on, we need to keep on fighting for this, because there just needs to be an end to this. And I'm hoping that in the long run, I don't burn out and I keep continuing to organize, and that people never forget about Palestine, or especially the siege on Gaza, because it's just awful.
Norman, why as a Black organizer do you stand with Palestine?
This is a no-brainer question for me. All of my comrades in BSFR, obviously when you look at Palestine and look at occupation led by Israel, it's very clear that it's a part of a larger problem. I think as Black organizers, we need to commit ourselves to the fight against occupation and colonialism, no matter where it is. And I know a lot of people kind of raise the question to me and, BSFR as a whole is, why we're so involved in this and why this matters deeply. And I think we've really tried to, educate our fellow students, community members on why this does affect us. And there's just a lot of continuity between the repression we see in Palestine, the repression we see in Africa, and then the repression we see against Black Americans here in the United States.
Sarah, do you feel, as a Palestinian, as a student on campus, that so far with everything you've seen, do you feel supported with kind of like the greater whole of students on campus?
I don't know if I would say for the greater whole. Something about U of I is really known to be a really demobilized campus, which is, a lot of people aren't ready to take action. I feel like I definitely found community, and I do feel very supported with the people, who do come out here, who do want to learn. If I'm sitting in class, I don't think my classmates would be I think they would just be kind of awkward. But I really don't expect the average person to be that conscious or to be that involved, which is an issue, because this is something that is directly affecting them. And even if it wasn't, I mean, it's a humanitarian crisis. The least you can do is slightly care about it. So which is why I really enjoy the programming that has been created, because creating political thought is very, very important. And it's something that I recently, I was always aware of it, that I needed to read and educate myself, but especially now in these times and as an organizer, that is very important.
So interestingly enough, so it's me, some Black faculty and BSFR individuals that are helping with programming, and we're actually made aware of some information at other campuses, how Black students are actually facing a lot of anti-Blackness in these kind of encampment spaces. And I don't want to reveal the campus and the individuals involved, but there was a large state university where the Black students in the encampment actually had to take up grievances and have an accountability meeting with the main organizers of the encampment, and I think the issue there was that it was a lot of people organizing on behalf of Palestinian students that weren't necessarily representative of what they want, and there's a lot of people who kind of lacked the cultural consciousness to recognize what roles people's identities do play in a setting like this. So I think it's important that we always keep those things in the back of our mind, but at the same time we do have to have a progressive mindset. I think people get bogged down in a lot of discourse. People have come to me saying certain things and questioning why I'm doing certain things or why the encampment's doing certain things. I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is getting out here and being mobilized. Being in BSFR, all of us, you develop a certain political ideology that you can you can get invested in and engage in discourse with faculty and people who kind of have that consciousness. But when you come out here, all of that pretty much dissolves. And, when you recognize that we need to have principled unity, I think that's very important. But at the same time, we do have to recognize the threat of anti-Blackness in spaces like these. And I think, here at UIUC, I think, what's really helped combat that is the inclusion of Black students and Black faculty in organizing this. And I think we're doing a very good job of, combating issues that are seen at other campuses.
Can you also tell us about the teach-in?
One of my comrades and our faculty representative, we decided to lead a teach-in on titled Black Studies as Life Studies, and included kind of an analysis of June Jordan's framework of Black Studies. So, looking at, how does something like that even emerge? How can we translate life experience, especially minority life experience, into a university setting? But also, what are the downfalls of that? Why don't students here feel that their studies relate to their life? And, and I think what was really nice to see was we had a whole crowd of people gathered around here, and I think we probably had 20 people that were speaking out on, why does or doesn't what they're engaging in here at the university relate to their life.
Sarah and Norman, thank you for having this conversation with me.
Of course. Thank you.
That was Sarah Hijab and Norman Hernandez, a part of Students for Justice in Palestine and Black Students for Revolution at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In our last segment, Associate Professor Eric McDuffie briefly spoke about the UN International Court of Justice's ruling in South Africa's case accusing Israel of genocide, in response to which Israel denied the accusation. South Africa has taken legal action against Israel by filing a case at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, the highest court of the United Nations, accusing Israel of genocide against Palestinians in Palestine. This case ruled in favor of South Africa, and Israel has been accused in the International Court of Justice of violating its obligations under the Genocide Convention in the Gaza Strip. Here's a clip about the ruling, explaining the opinion of the court.
With regard to the present situation, Israel must, in accordance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. The court further considers that Israel must ensure with immediate effect that its military forces do not commit any of the aforementioned acts. The court is also of the view that Israel must take measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to the members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. Israel must also take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Genocide Convention against members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. The court considers that Israel must submit a report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month as from the date of this order. The report so provided shall then be communicated to South Africa, which shall be given the opportunity to submit to the court its comments thereon.
We spoke with a U of I professor of international law and lawyer, Francis Boyle. He specializes in defining genocide and has partaken in cases regarding genocide for countries such as Bosnia. In 1988, he became a legal advisor to the Provisional Government for the State of Palestine.
In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. In other words, that to be guilty of genocide, a government did not have to intend to destroy the whole group, as the Nazis intended to do with the Jews. Rather, a government can be guilty of genocide even if it intends to destroy a mere part of the group, whole or in part. To find Israel guilty of genocide against the Palestinians, it is not required to prove that Israel has the intention to exterminate all Palestinians. Rather, all that is necessary is to establish that Israel intends to destroy a substantial part of the Palestinians.
That was Professor Francis Boyle, professor of international law and lawyer. Before that, we heard from two students, Sarah Hijab and Norman Hernandez, from the UIUC encampment. Coming up is an interview with Rabbi Capers Fanay, a black rabbi.
As a black Jew in America, I have compassion for the suffering that I see in Gaza.
As we continue our conversation, you can leave us a voicemail at 217-244-1989 or email us at illinois-soul@illinois.edu. We're looking for folks to tell us something good about their day or week. So give us a call and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Illinois Soul. Stay with us on Dialogue after this short break. From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. We've been speaking with professors and students at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign about the ongoing conflicts in Palestine and Israel and the resulting student encampments. We are now segueing our conversation towards the history of Black solidarity with Jewish people in America. I spoke with Rabbi Capers Fanay. Rabbi Capers was born in South Carolina and raised in Illinois on the south side of Chicago. He's also the chief rabbi of the International Israelite Board of Rabbis. He's consulted several organizations, such as the DuSable Museum of African American History, the Chicago Historical Society, and the Black Holocaust Museum located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
When you say Jewish, a black face does not come to mind. Normally, when you say Jewish and you say anti-Semitic, you oftentimes think of Ashkenazi Jews. And so, as a Jew and as a black Jew in America, I have compassion for the suffering that I see in Gaza.
We now welcome Rabbi Capers Fanay to Dialogue. You started your journey with Judaism in the early 1980s, and you have dedicated yourself to the Israelite Academy for 6 years. What would you say about your journey so far?
Well, my journey has been quite interesting. Over the last several years, many years ago, I became a member of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, and most recently, our organization, the International Israelite Board of Rabbis, gained membership in the New York Board of Rabbis. And so we're very proud of that accomplishment. And the journey has been very exciting. I have been to Israel many times, maybe 7 or 8 times. Some at the invitation of the Israeli government. And so I absolutely love the state of Israel. I love to visit. I love the people of Israel. And I'm really feeling for them with this war in Gaza.
And how do you feel about the current conflict happening in Gaza towards the Palestinian people?
Well, I feel that Palestinian people are really suffering for what one element of the Palestinian people are doing, which is Hamas. And now they're really causing many civilians and children especially to suffer. It seems that they could get their way out of this by simply releasing the remaining hostages that were kidnapped on October the 7th. Now that the Israeli IDF is going into Rafah, I think there's going to be more death and more destruction. And I'm deeply concerned for all life, Palestinian and Israeli lives.
What is it like being a Black Jewish voice today?
It's kind of difficult because when you say Jewish, a black face does not come to mind. Normally, when you say Jewish and you say anti-Semitic, you oftentimes think of Ashkenazi Jews. And so, as a Jew and as a black Jew in America, I have compassion for the suffering that I see in Gaza. I am a compassionate person, and I don't believe that we can simply say that they attacked Israel on October the 7th. So whatever they get as a result of their attack, we're holding everybody responsible. And that really does not seem to make too much sense to me. And so I just really feel that Hamas should release the remaining hostages. That's number one. And then they should seek a path, if not to peace, at least to a ceasefire.
South Africa was actually suing Israel on terms of genocide, and the International Court had sided with South Africa. Have you heard of that at all?
I have heard of that. I really don't know why South Africa has taken that particular position. Israel is not an apartheid state. I believe that there are mechanisms that Israel has in place to defend itself, but I also think that there are Palestinian Israelis, Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, and they are able to move. There are Palestinians in the Israeli Knesset. That doesn't sound like apartheid to me. What South Africa, I've been to South Africa several times, and I have been to all of the various museums and other places, from Soweto to other places, Johannesburg and so forth. And I have seen the remnants of the apartheid system. Israel has done its best, in my humble opinion, to be an open democracy for all people, Palestinian people, Israeli people, and Israelis who come from all over the world, including Ethiopia. In my opinion, I think that what we need to do is to release the hostages and come to some type of ceasefire with the elements of Hamas that are left, so they say that they're in Rafah. We need to move quickly with that so that we can stop murdering people and start saving lives.
You are currently listening to Dialogue on Illinois Soul. I'm Kennedy Vincent, and I'm currently speaking with Rabbi Capers Fanay about the Palestine and Israel conflict. And what has the solidarity been like for African Americans and Jewish people since the civil rights movement, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the solidarity has been, I think that we need to do more, because every lecture I've ever given or talk I've ever been a part of, we always talk about Abraham Joshua Heschel and Dr. Martin Luther King. We cannot simply get along through that romance. There needs to be more roads, more bridges of understanding between the African American community and the Jewish community. And one of the bridges should be African American Jews to help build and open doors into the African American community and the Jewish community. And African Americans are not getting that, and our Jewish brothers and sisters are not getting that. There needs to be new connections, new bridges. And I don't think that either community is doing enough. The African American community nor the Jewish community is doing enough to restructure, to rebuild those ties and those bridges with the African American community. I have relationships with the Muslim and Palestinian community in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. And those relationships are very important to me. I have relationships in the Jewish community. Those relationships are very important to me. I would love to be a conduit between the communities of the Palestinians and the Ashkenazi Jews. I would love to be a conduit, a pathway in bridging a meeting place where our various communities could gather, sit, and talk, and pray God get rid of some of the hostility that has continued to grow in the United States since October the 7th.
In this episode, we have spoken with other guests about the state of Islam and being Muslim and also a Black American and how that's had a long history. And now we're speaking with you when we're drawing different connections with the relationship between Judaism and Black Americans. How do you think religion connects the two groups?
I think that the religion plays a critical part in connecting Muslims and African Americans. I visited various mosques in the city on the south side that are predominantly African American. I believe that the relationship can be stronger, but I think that it's going to take more than some of my Jewish brothers and sisters simply protesting about anti-Semitism, and look at how can we move forward through some dialogue, as opposed to simply using the term anti-Semitic whenever it seems like convenient, and maybe there are issues on various campuses. I don't know. I don't visit. Offered myself to actually go to various college campuses around the country. I've not received an invitation to talk to Arab students, Palestinians, Jordanians, as well as African American and Ashkenazi Jewish students as well. We have to find ways to dialogue. Without dialogue, we cannot really, in my humble opinion, get anywhere. And we have to have the capacity to listen and to absorb the hurt that other communities have felt.
And what do you think about the distinction between Zionism and anti-Semitism? What does that mean to you?
Zionism means something entirely different to me than a lot of other people. Zionism is an ideal. It's more of an ideal, a state of being, a state of mind, as opposed to the definitions that I've heard of Zionism from some organizations, some Jewish organizations today, which is, to me, I'm frightened by those definitions. It's an ideal of a idealistic time and place, but it is not used, in my opinion, in the political terms that it is used today.
Do you think the solidarity has been strained between Jewish people and Black Americans now that many Black Americans are standing in solidarity with Palestine?
I think so. And that's a reason that I think where a person like myself and other Black American Jews could be helpful in mending fences, but you can't mend fences without recognizing the destruction that has happened in Gaza. And pray God it does not happen in the West Bank. And so if we're not willing to sit and really have open discussions, free, and take the sugar out of what we're saying and have difficult conversations, that's what's needed, in my opinion.
Rabbi Capers, thank you for having this dialogue with me.
Absolutely, Kennedy. I deeply appreciate the invitation, and I just want to say, as we leave, that I pray for the peace for Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and I pray for peace for the state of Israel as well. God bless you all, and thank you so much for having me.
The Dialogue team would like to thank Professor Eric McDuffie, Sarah Hijab, Norman Hernandez, Professor Francis Boyle, and Rabbi Capers Fanay. As we continue our dialogues, you can leave us a voicemail at 217-244-1989 or email us at illinois-soul@illinois.edu. We're looking for folks to tell us something good about their day or week. So give us a call and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Illinois Soul, and you may get featured on the show. You can now find our podcast streaming on Spotify. Dialogue's executive producers are Needhi Shastri and myself, Kennedy Vincent. Contributing producers include our News and Public Affairs Director, Reginald Hardwick. Dialogue's theme song is by Lamont Holden, and production assistance by Steve Mork. Dialogue is a part of Illinois Soul and Illinois Public Media. Join us for our next dialogue every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. and Tuesday night at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul FM 101.1 and WILL AM 580 Wednesdays at 8 p.m.